Raila Odinga, EGH, will be vying for the position of chairperson for the African Union Commission, noting that regionally he served as the African Union Special Envoy for Infrastructure Development. His Excellency the President endorsed Right Honorable Raila Odinga as Kenya's candidate for the chairperson of the African Union Commission, noting that the Right Honorable Raila Odinga's candidature for the position of the chairperson was not only his personal ambition, but also a symbol of Kenya's deep commitment to the goals of the African Union and its desire to participate in shaping the continent's future. Commending the government of Kenya, led by His Excellency the President, for a robust campaign in support of the candidate, reinforced by the continental integration and cooperation and guided by Kenya's foreign policy. Further commending the remarkable achievement by the Right Honorable Raila Odinga for emerging the runner-up in the election of the chairperson of the African Union Commission on Saturday the 15th of February 2025, recognizing the need to sustain Kenya's growing prominence on the continental stage and advocacy for a more united, prosperous, self-reliant Africa in resonance with the aspirations of millions of Africans who seek to see the continent empowered to chart its own course in the global arena. Now, therefore, the Senate, one, expresses its profound thanks to the Right Honorable Raila Odinga, EGH, for demonstrating unwavering commitment to the service of Africa by offering his candidature for the position of chairperson of the African Union Commission, for his leadership in advancing Pan-African unity, for his dedication to the development and integration of the African continent, and for his distinguished attempt at the election. Second, records his thanks to His Excellency Dr. William Samoei Ruto, CGH, President and Commander-in-Chief of the Defense Forces of the Republic of Kenya, for endorsing the Right Honorable Raila Odinga, EGH, as Kenya's candidate for election as a chairperson of Africa Union, and for coordinating the campaign in support of his candidature. And three, records his congratulations to His Excellency Mahmoud Ali Yusuf on his election as the chairperson of the Commission on Saturday, the 15th of February 2025. Mr. Speaker, this is a very important motion because the Senate must be recorded as having had a voice post the events of Addis, Saturday the 15th, 2025. Because Kenyans will want to know 20, 30, 40, 50 years later, as students of history, on what leaders of this House thought of the candidature of the Right Honorable Prime Minister, and second and most importantly, whether we appreciated that even standing up to the stage and taking on the continent of Africa, seeking the support of the more than 48 heads of states and governments, Mr. Speaker, and securing the support of nearly half of them is no mean achievement. Never minding the fact, Mr. Speaker, that unfortunately we didn't clinch this position as a country. Mr. Speaker, you know there has been very many speculations on reasons. I've seen people say various things. So Senator Wambua's party leader weigh in. I've seen my good friend Senator Onyonka on TV shows. You know, Mr. Speaker, first of all, I hold the view that we can only opine about what may have led and what may not have worked well in this campaign. But it will be impossible to tell. Let nobody lie to the country that they are able to tell which countries voted in favor or against. Therefore, these theories that are being advanced here, oh, SADC, I think that's what Senator Onyonka was saying, or this or the other, you cannot tell. Because this was a secret ballot, Senator Onyonka. We watched from the floors of AU as people did cast their vote. Presidents were being handed a secret ballot. In fact, many of them, by the time of voting, had actually long left the room. So the vote was cast by either their foreign affairs ministers or vice presidents for those countries that had been represented. Therefore, it's not possible to accurately tell which country. You know, Mr. Speaker, in this day and age of fake news, people can fall victim to so many shenanigans and theories that are banding around, Mr. Speaker. But you cannot accurately predict and say country X, Y, or Z Not even if you are a handwriting specialist. Unless Senator Onyonka, you know President Ramaphosa's handwriting. then you can say, I saw that one and I think I know how he writes his, and so many other things. But even then, where will you access these ballot papers? But we can perhaps speculate. We know for a fact, for example, that immediately after the first round where Prime Minister Raila was leading, many of the votes that had been cast in favor of the candidate from Madagascar shifted to the candidate from Djibouti. And therefore, what people will be speculating, who are these people that had initially voted for the candidate from Madagascar? But you can't tell still at that time. You don't know even if your neighbor, Mr. Speaker, this is like we hear stories that in a particular polling station, those of us that have participated in elections a couple of times, where you find a candidate that does sometimes so poorly that even in their home polling station, they don't secure number of votes equivalent to their family members. So at the family dinner table in the evening, everybody claims that I voted for you, my brother. And you can't tell which of these brothers and sisters never did cast their vote for this family member. Secret ballots are very interesting. There is no genius also, Mr. Speaker, because I've seen some fake theorists try to say, I told you. In an election, there can only be two outcomes. It's either a win or a loss. Therefore, there is no genius in predicting that somebody will either win or lose in the probability of only two outcomes, Mr. Speaker. But that is not where we need to turn our focus and attention on. Our focus and attention, Mr. Speaker, are the positive steps that have been made, that Kenya has made a mark. And I have seen people advance theories even, Mr. Speaker, that suggesting that to the point where people look at us when we sometimes offer ourselves for these continental positions and say, you are such a strong character that we don't think we'd be comfortable having you in certain positions. That is the truth and the reality. You know, for example, that the United States of America is a superpower. I know for a fact that if it was not for the fact that they have a veto power at the UN, if they were to offer their candidates, many times those candidates will never find favor with many of the other countries from the rest of the world. Because that's what people do to strong personalities. They feel like you're too strong, you're too good for us. And people will advance whatever theories they want to say. Mr. Speaker, I have seen people give explanation why I disagree with you, for example, and I think you're gravely wrong, Senator Onyonka, on the issue of SADC. I saw you say, Kenya has mismanaged the DRC situation. Perhaps you need to take time and understand what is Kenya's position on DRC.
You can do better without referring so much on the senator, so that also just move. Say people are saying without mentioning his name.
No, Senator I said Onyonka, I disagree with him.
Protected you I thought leave it at that.
Okay, you're protected enough. I didn't know. I know Senator Onyonka to be such a strong character that I never thought he would feel. Who can intimidate Senator Onyonka? How? It's not possible. Yes, of course. Of course. And I will listen. I will sit to hear your side of the story.
Queue. Senator Onyonka, then you must queue on the dashboard.
Please queue Senator Onyonka, because we would wish to hear.
Majority Leader, just finish.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, so as not to attract all these points of orders, I will not mention anybody's name. Let me just focus and say why I disagree with those that are telling us.
Is intimidating you, Majority
No,
Leader.
it's because No, Senator Eddie was agitated, and because he's my friend, I thought maybe something is wrong. Mr. Speaker, the point that I was conversing is that I know people have argued and said, Kenya's position on DRC. What is our position on DRC, Mr. Speaker? Kenya is part and parcel of the East African community. And for the last 2 or 3 years, East African community member states had military presence in DRC, and they ensured that they managed the conflict so successfully that by the time they were exiting late last year upon the request of DRC, not a single soldier had lost their life. But given that DRC had the strong view that because Rwanda is part and parcel of the East African community, they were not comfortable with having presence of the rest of the countries because they said they were conflicted. They requested that East African community soldiers pull out of that country and allow other regional bodies. And therefore, SADC stepped up. And that's why there are soldiers from Southern Africa in that region doing peacekeeping mission. Therefore, I don't understand why people will want to say that Kenya, in their positioning of their situation in DRC, should have taken a different direction. How do you disown the rest of the East African community? A community that you're part and parcel of. In fact, in my own analysis, Mr. Speaker, we did better. And this situation could have been handled better when we had the presence of East African community forces. Remember, at that particular time, not a single life of a soldier had been lost, and they had managed to contain the hostilities. Look at what has happened since the coming into place of SADC forces. M23 has advanced. They have gained more territory. Their soldiers, some of them have been killed. Part of the resolutions of the meeting that happened in Addis Ababa on the night before the vote, including even allowing those soldiers to be transported back home. A very difficult situation, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, I don't think that it is proper for us as a country to speculate and find fault just to score cheap political points, Mr. Speaker, because either you don't like the Prime Minister or you don't like the President, Mr. Speaker, and therefore you choose to argue and push narrative that, when taken through the test of logic, cannot hold to be true, Mr. Speaker. There are many reasons why people decide to vote this or the other way. But the thing that the Senate is trying to do this morning is to record its appreciation that when 22 heads of state vote for you for 6 straight rounds, that's nearly half of Africa. Isn't that really an accomplishment, Mr. Speaker? Doesn't it speak true to the fact that those people believe that this is the right leader for this particular continent, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, we all know that elections are very complicated processes, and there are many reasons why people may vote this or the other way. This was not our day, but the bigger conversation that had been pushed throughout the period for nearly 1 year, that Prime Minister Raila Odinga moved from each of the African capitals, sharing his vision of a united and prosperous Africa, alongside the ideals and the founding principles of the AUC, Mr. Speaker, are things that need not be lost. In fact, it is my hope, Mr. Speaker, that His Excellency Mohamud Yusuf, that was elected, will borrow on some of the good ideas. And I think I listened to him the other night or 2 nights ago on BBC, where he said he'll be reaching out because there are certain things which, for sure, the former Prime Minister of Kenya pushed that he strongly agrees with, and say, if indeed he had the formula of achieving those ideas, the brilliant ideas that he had, then as a duly elected chairperson, he's duty-bound to reach out to people that have the age-old experience and the stature to push that particular initiative. Mr. Speaker, I also want to challenge Kenyans that when one of us steps out to the global stage, we are duty-bound to perhaps pose our local differences and not transport them to the international stage. It is not just Prime Minister Raila that has been a victim of this. You know for a fact that many of the fake accounts that were being operated of his opponents were being run from Nairobi here by people who simply disagree with the candidature of Raila Odinga. We need to mature and rise to the position of knowing that our local differences need not necessarily be exported to the global stage and show to everybody that we don't agree with this particular person or the other. I believe that in the same way, once an election is done, for example, in your county, and people grant you the opportunity to serve as senator for County X, Mr. Speaker, all the other people queue behind you, and you represent their interest here in the Senate. There's no need to undercut and undermine each other. It's a retrogressive practice that is continuing to gain bad reputation. And unfortunately, it is supported by certain leaders who don't see beyond petty partisan politics, Mr. Speaker, who believe that it is good to cheer on young people, even as they malign their own country online in the global stage, thinking that it will power their popularity. You know, this addiction to clickbaits, Mr. Speaker, and trying to be favored and loved online is what will bring down many a political career. Mr. Speaker, we must always appreciate and know that there is a line between being democratic, expressing your views of disagreement or agreement with a particular position, and being outright, Mr. Speaker, foul with your language and abusive of other people in their pursuit of their interests. It broke my heart, for example, Mr. Speaker, to see certain people celebrating, including leaders. I must add that unfortunately, some of them sit in this house, Mr. Speaker, posting messages and saying, oh, I'm glad so-and-so lost. Really? In the 21st century? That was a new law for me, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister Raila Odinga, you don't have to agree with him politically, but he has earned his space. He has made his mark. You may never have voted for him in your life, or like me, you may have voted for him once or twice, Mr. Speaker, but do we really have to sink that low as a country where even leaders, Mr. Speaker, post messages of celebration and saying, oh, we are glad you didn't do this or the other? I want to urge us as a country that perhaps it is time we pause and draw a line and realize that what is a fine line between politics? What are the things that you can agree on? What are the things that you can disagree on, Mr. Speaker? How do we learn to coexist with each other? What is this negative energy that has permeated our country so much, Mr. Speaker, that even on such solemn issues that can easily bring together a country, Mr. Speaker, we want to disagree on? Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I don't want to dwell much on the things that haven't gone right. This is about a celebration of a Kenyan who stepped up on the continental stage and did us proud. The results notwithstanding, Mr. Speaker. And as a Kenyan, I felt proud watching him in Addis, making his presentation, meeting with other heads of state, listening and following to the more than 20 heads of states, nearly half of Africa, who stood with him up to the 6th round, Mr. Speaker, and voting and insisting that this is a man that needs to lead our continent, Mr. Speaker. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, is to congratulate the gentleman that was elected, because in any election, there's a winner and a loser. Only that in this case, in my humble view, Africa lost, Mr. Speaker. It's not Raila that lost. Africa would have been served better by this statesman, Mr. Speaker. But because in any democratic process, we have been taught and must appreciate, Mr. Speaker, that the person that the majority have had their say and their view is that that person takes the lead, Mr. Speaker, then that particular individual, Mr. Speaker, this time being His Excellency Mohamed Ali Yusuf, we're duty bound to congratulate him. The last thing, Mr. Speaker, that I want to say, because I want to grant this opportunity to other senators also to share their thoughts on it, is that I know President William Ruto was asked by the rest of the African heads of states, I think last year, in last year's summit, to lead the charge on reforms of the AU. I want to believe, Mr. Speaker, that part of the recommendations that they will be making is one on the issue of how to make Africa a more cohesive society while taking into consideration the diverse nature of our society, especially in terms of region, language, and religion. I want to believe that it is possible, Mr. Speaker, to either force people or make it, you tweak the rules as such that it is possible that the chairperson and the vice chairperson are people that are elected that represent, if not the three of those demographics, at least two of them, Mr. Speaker. You know, for example, from our constitution, you must give it to the genius that insisted on the 50% plus one rule. And therefore, they have posted a politician to form alliances. Otherwise, if it had been left to simple majority, Mr. Speaker, you never know what will have happened in this country. People will have long disappeared into tribal cocoons and mobilized themselves along those lines. But because of that ingenuity, introducing a rule to the game, ensuring that for you, for example, to be elected president of Kenya, you must have the support of at least half of the people that... Is my time up? Okay. I think I need to wind up. The point I'm making is that in the reforms that are being proposed before the AU, it is my hope, Mr. Speaker, that we will capture that particular complication so that the Anglophones, or we don't have a divide of the Christians versus Muslims, because I've seen people try to speculate. I mentioned earlier about lists that are being circulated about which countries voted for or against, Mr. Speaker, that it is possible to tweak the rules such that at least at the level of the chair and the vice chair. And if possible, even at the level of the commissioners, Mr. Speaker, you have a representation of diversity, despite the fact that this is an election and sometimes you cannot control certain decisions. But at least have a sense of, in the outcome of the process, that every African will feel part and parcel, whether they are Francophone, Anglophone, Portuguese speaking, Swahili speaking, Christian or Muslim, Mr. Speaker, from the north or south, east or west of this continent, Mr. Speaker. Nonetheless, this was a good showing. I want to believe that as leaders, there are many things that we have learned from this particular exercise, how our society can become better, and therefore I want to yield the floor, Mr. Speaker, to listen to the views of those who agree with me, those who disagree with me. I am willing to listen and learn. I have shared my thoughts on why I think it is a lie to try and perpetuate that a particular region voted this or the other way. But maybe there are people who have ways of establishing which country voted in favor, which region did do this or the other. I want to yield the floor to listen to those particular people, Mr. Speaker. With those many remarks, I want to request the Senator for Homa Bay, none other than Senator Moses Kajwang, Chairperson of PAC, son of Suba, Mr. Speaker, to second this motion. I thank you, Mr.
Chair
Speaker.
CPAC, Senator Kajwang.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to second this motion